Hi, this video is on the first part of the lab, which is on the bones of the skull. And here is my sheet with a list of the bones. This is what I will be following. Okay, here is our head from our skeleton that we got in the lab. Took his head off, Mr. Bones. All right, so the bones of the skull. First, we have the frontal bone. Then we have the parietal. Next, we have the temporal bone. Then the ethmoid is inside here. Then we have the occipital and the sphenoid bone here. So those are the cranial bones. Next we have the facial bones, which consist of the nasal bone here, the lacrimal, the palatine bone here, the zygomatic cheekbone, the inferior nasal concha inside there, the vomer bone, the maxilla, and the mandible. All right, so revisiting the frontal bone here, we have the supraorbital foramen and the glabella. And then moving to the parietal bone here, we have the sutures, which are the sagittal suture, the coronal suture, the squamous suture, and the lambdoid suture here. All right, next in the occipital bone region, we have the foramen magnum. All right, and back to the temporal bone, we've got the styloid process here, the mastoid process, and then underneath, got the stylomastoid foramen, the carotid canal here. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my sheet at the same time. And the foramen lacerum, the external auditory meatus, and inside here we have the jugular foramen and the internal auditory meatus there. All right, next we have the sphenoid bone. All right, sorry, I cut it off. We have the sphenoid bone here. Back to that, we've got the optic foramen there, and then we have the greater wing here, and the lesser wing of the sphenoid, and the sella turcica here, this kind of boxy bone here. Okay, next we have the foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum, a smaller one. And then the superior orbital fissure and the inferior orbital fissure here. Okay, next is the ethmoid bone. And we have the cribriform plate, and then in the middle is the crista galli, and then in the front we have that perpendicular plate there down the middle. All right, and then next in the mandible here, we have the mandibular condyle, the mandibular notch, the coronoid process, mandibular ramus, and the mental foramen. All right, and then the maxilla, we've got the infraorbital foramen, the anterior nasal spine, and the, try to open this, the incisive fossa there. And then back to our inferior nasal concha. It's kind of hard to see in this tiny skull, but we've got the middle nasal concha in the back, in the upper back, and then deeper we've got the inferior nasal concha. And then lastly, we've got the palatine bone here, and then the greater palatine foramen is there. And that's it for the bones of the skull.